Well, hello everybody. Warm welcome to today's event, to today's RegTalk. It's the first RegTalk that we're holding from the RegTech subcommittee of the Singapore Fintech Association. There should be more. We are planning on more on that a little bit more in just a second. My name is Rolf Haugenschild. I'm one of the members of the RegTech subcom. So taking you through this event today, giving you a little bit of an introduction, and then also moderating the panel afterwards. So first, a little bit to refresh your mind on the Singapore Fintech Association, not too deep, but most of all about the RegTech subcom. So the RegTech subcom has been in existence for a number of years already, like 3 years, 4 years. You may not have noticed too much in the last few years throughout COVID, where the outreach was a little bit less. We couldn't do these sorts of events like we are doing today. Fortunately, we can do today again. Our mission is really to build, to foster RegTech in Singapore, to help support and grow that ecosystem for RegTech. So looking for the RegTech companies, but also helping inspiring financial institutions to actually use RegTech. So it's not only about the RegTech companies themselves, it's also about the financial institutions using RegTech. We are most of all looking into 4 different aspects. Our objectives, it's about talent development, and you'll be hearing that a lot in the market. There is way too little talent in compliance. There is way too little talent in technology. So RegTech definitely has its challenges, and we are looking to work together also with tertiary institutions, how to actually build talent, also how to get people interested in RegTech, potentially joining RegTechs or helping implement RegTech at the financial institutions. Then engagement with regulators. We all know how important it is to actually have a connection with our regulator, with MAS here as we talk first and foremost. MAS also being very supportive of technology, the fintech ecosystem, the fintech environment generally, and RegTech more particularly. If you are not aware of it, MAS actually has a RegTech grant these days where financial institutions can apply for a grant to support them in implementing RegTech. So if you are with an FI, take that into consideration to make your processes more efficient. Then engagement with the industry, part of what we are doing today. How can we bring together the financial industry and RegTech solutions, the RegTech ecosystem? How can that really be bridged, that gap be bridged between the financial institutions, raise their interest in it, show the opportunities of RegTech, encourage them to work with RegTech, make their strides in it, learn about it, benefit from it. And finally, nurturing the development of RegTech companies, partially through that bridging of the gap with the FIs, connecting with the regulator and so on, but also trying, like the SFA more generally, bringing about what it takes to run your company, how to grow your company, how to build your technology, and so on and so forth. So that support to RegTech as well. Earlier this year, we actually updated the RegTech landscape map. This is the current landscape map that you can see. We currently have 29 service providers who put their hand up. There may be a few more in the market who didn't shout about. So if you want to get onto that RegTech landscape map and aren't on it yet, please do reach out. We can and will update it at some stage. But it gives a good overview of who is in the market, what types of services are being provided, and also hopefully supports financial institutions to actually find the right providers to work with if they are looking for a solution, if they want to tackle a specific problem in RegTech or in compliance, in regulations. How could they find something suitable? The map you can actually also find on the website of the SFA under the RegTech subcom. So you would need to go under the committee RegTech subcom, then you will find the map as well. Another initiative that we took is the RegTech pitch book, where 16 RegTechs provided information about them. This is meant to actually put forward to industry associations, to put forward to financial institutions, showing them, showcasing RegTech service providers. What are you doing for the financial institutions to find potential solutions providers to their challenges, to their problems, so that you can learn more about them. There is information about the solutions they provide, contact information, and so on, that you can really get in touch together, find the appropriate provider. So those are some of the initiatives that the RegTech subcom is currently undertaking. And the last thing, as I mentioned today, we are kicking off a series, at least a planned series, on RegTalk, where we want to cover in events like today, hopefully also with a growing community, have talks about different aspects of RegTech. Today is going to be a somewhat more general introduction. In other cases, it will be about a very specific topic where we will deep dive or discuss developments, regulatory developments, and tech solutions with it, or whatever it may be. You will find out it will be very multifaceted, and we really hope that we can hold these events as in-person events like today, where we can then also have a chat together, get to know each other within that RegTech community, learn from each other, and so on, build our contacts within the community. So that is the current activities of the RegTech subcom. Hopefully we can build on further together on it. Today, we are starting with that first RegTalk, navigating the compliance maze, as in there is lots and lots of rules and regulations about. You must have heard of that. It's always changing, and that's a huge challenge. Before going into the panel, to which I'm very much looking forward, a brief introduction. So on regulatory side, some of you may be very familiar with, some of you may be a bit less familiar with. That's why this introduction is about the different things that we are exposed to from a regulatory point of view. Essentially, we have, and unfortunately it may be a bit hidden behind those chairs, different types of financial products, currencies, securities, funds, insurance, and then we have a good number of different activities connected to these products that can be carried out. That is roughly the spectrum. So you have for the currencies anything from providing credits, loans, taking deposits, money transfers, cross-border, domestic, foreign exchange. Then you have markets that can be either the FX market, that can be securities markets. Nowadays, we are also looking into crypto assets markets, cryptocurrencies, so lots of different types of markets around. Custody is on the security side, one of the established ones. For crypto, custody is becoming a topic very much as well, and is proposed to come under regulations as well. Brokerage, securities, futures trading, one of the aspects to securities funds, and then we have the asset management, really the investment management that is being carried out, leading to the funds that can then potentially go to the markets with the brokers. Financial advisory that targets predominantly the individuals. How could you invest? The recommendation side. And then also insurance products that are created as insurance, reinsurance, and the distribution of insurance. For that, in Singapore, we have already a few different acts. Payment Services Act for part of it, Banking Act, Securities and Futures Act, Financial Advisors Act, and the Insurance Act. Not to mention that there is also an MAS Act. There is for the Terrorism Financing Act, and so on and so forth. And soon there will be another act, the Financial Services and Markets Act. So it keeps blooming, to put it that way. The different acts then have different types of activities in it that cover the different aspects of what you can do. And essentially for each of these activities, and that is the way that Singapore regulates financial services, it is activities-based. More or less for each one of those activities, you have each one of those licenses grants you the license to conduct one of those activities. If you want to conduct multiple activities, you may need multiple licenses. In case of the PS Act, for example, you can have one license for a single or for multiple activities. Overall, it starts becoming quite complex when you want to carry out a specific activity, and it cannot be put squarely into one of these boxes. One of the things you can see for the Banking Act, the banks are allowed to do more things than other financial institutions within one license. Otherwise, it's pretty much that concept of one activity, one license. Then you have a few so-called incidental activities that are also covered by that specific license. So that creates another aspect of how you need to navigate your regulations. Then as the next stage, you can actually apply for specific exemptions that you can put on top of your license to carry out a secondary activity. And finally, we have a bit of the where do fintechs generally fit. And you see that fintechs generally need to have the same type of license that traditional financial institutions carrying out the same activity need to have. In certain cases, there is a little bit of additional regulation for the fintechs, and then you have material challenges, in particular in the blockchain space of like, what license do you need? Because a crypto is not necessarily a digital payment token. It could be a virtual asset. It could be a tokenized security. And if it is a tokenized security, it's not the digital payment services, the EPT license anymore. It gets into the SFA licensing. So there are lots and lots of questions about what license do you need? What service, what activity can you carry out with that specific license? So that is the maze number one. Then we have the second maze that we will be speaking about quite a bit. So this is an overview we had created internally at Ingenia about fund management companies. What are roughly the regulatory, the compliance obligation a fund management company has? What do they need to look out for? And as I mentioned before, it's for a fund management company. So for a bank, it will be quite a bit more complex. If you have another type of license, There are other things you need to do, roughly many things, maybe the same things. Other things are completely different, or also focus may be quite a bit different, and we may be hearing a bit more about that from our panelists as well. So you have things like in the customer side, definitely, that are similar, customer onboarding for every type of financial institution, monitoring, reduce suspicious transactions reporting when we look into monitoring, transactions monitoring, completely different whether you are in the wealth management space or in the payment space. So there are very different things. But overall, when you look at it into those four broad categories, governance, you have a lot of obligations to stay on top of. From the regulatory filings, that is your regulatory filings that you need to do quarterly, monthly, annually, whatever it is. Ad hoc filings, you need to stay on top of it. Policies and procedures you need to have, you need to manage, you need to update whenever there is change in your process, when there is a change in regulations. Enterprise-wide money laundering, terrorism financing assessment. If you are from a financial institution, you will know the pains of it. Compliance reporting for internal governance processes, customers we already touched on, but you also have complaints management that you need to look into. Marketing, what are the rules, regulations if you actually want to distribute a financial product? Not easy. Human resources, you have your regulations around fit and proper. Many of you may know about that. Conflicts of interest, a huge topic for MAS, quite difficult to capture. We know that RegTalk provides solutions for that. Regulatory filings, already mentioned, trainings, whistleblowing, and then on the operational side for fund management, you have investment regulations around it. We may touch on that in the panel discussion. Outsourcing, something for every financial institution, as well as technology risk management, and technology risk management probably even more important for any fintech than for more traditional financial institutions, but not to underestimate there either. And also for all the RegTech companies, consider that you are a tech provider. So you need to be able to assist your financial institution clients to actually meet the respective regulations. If you don't meet those respective regulations, how could they possibly engage your service? And finally, also business continuity management. We've all gone through it the last 2 years. There are also different aspects to BCP, but it is something to consider as well. So again, we have a multitude of compliance obligations you need to comply with if you are a financial institution. How do you keep your overview? This is something we want to explore in just a second. And just to add on as a complexity, as a nice, or not so nice complexity actually, if you need to really deal with it, that I want to mention in particular because we are speaking about fintech, and fintech commonly leverages the internet, so is pretty much global, but regulations So if you have the license in Singapore and want to carry out the activity in Indonesia, sorry, you are out of luck, because that same activity may actually require a license in Indonesia as well. So you either need to get licensed there, or you need to know enough about what you can do and cannot do without a license. So if you are a fintech customers, you want to have global outreach. If you want to do it properly, you need to check on all these jurisdictions. So if you thought that the compliance, the licensing in Singapore is complex, the keeping up with regulatory obligations in Singapore is demanding, try to multiply it. How do you do that? So hopefully we can get a little bit of on the track how to actually do that in our panel. And for that, I would like to welcome our three panelists. Please, yes, you may take off the masks. Microphone is also easy to speak. So sorry, John, we're not starting with the men. We start over here. So first, I have the great pleasure to introduce Anu. Anu is originally coming from also the traditional financial space. I guess all of us have started out there at some stage. And over the last few years, moved deeper and deeper into Fintech, large regulated Fintech providers. So maybe you want to briefly go through the different companies that you worked with, because I will definitely miss out one that would be important and that we can then also learn from.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently with the Coinbase. I'm the Singapore Chief Compliance Officer and MLRO. Prior to this, so I think you might know about Coinbase. They are US-based crypto exchange listed. Prior to that, I was with Revolut, which again, some of you might know about. They offer a free card, so do sign up for it. They are into payments and they are based in the UK. Mainly, all the payment services that Rolf mentioned. Before that, I was with Swissquote, which is an online trading platform. So that has been my stint in fintech companies. Prior to that, MNCs, Prudential, Quilter, so just traditional companies prior to that.
Thanks, Anu. And then we have Chiara, who is CEO at O'Connor at Aidstone. So O'Connor at Aidstone is, sorry, Aidstone O'Connor, sorry for mixing up the two names, on a multifamily office, so a small but also regulated financial institution, quite different from the large MNCs that Anu worked in. You want to say a word as well?
Yeah, I'm the non-tech person in the room, so yeah, the elephant in the room, or the giraffe.
And also to mention on the sidelines, Chiara is actually a member of the executive committee of the Association of Independent Wealth Managers in Singapore. So a organization bringing together those small wealth management companies.
So just we have our members and ourselves, we have a CMS license for fund management. In the thing you showed before, all the requirements apply to us. Just for your knowledge.
And finally, John, bringing in the RegTech companies angle. Please give a short introduction to Quant Legal, but also before John actually has MNC experience on the legal side.
Hey, thank you, Rolf, and good evening, everyone. So I'm the RegTech Wonk representative. I know there's plenty of you out there, so I'm representing you all this evening in this discussion. So I started out as a partner in a law firm, then became an MNC general counsel, and had my fingers so substantially burnt by compliance that I said to myself, one day I will escape from this life and I'll go and solve those problems. So that's really what I'm trying to do with Quant Legal Tech. We take compliance complexity and try and make it as simple as possible, try and embed tone from the top in an organization, do things a little bit differently, and enable people to focus on what's important rather than the minutiae which most compliance people get buried.
Thanks a lot. So with that, we'll get into the discussions, and please, when you have a question, make yourself known. We are definitely more than happy to take questions from the audience as well. So maybe to start out, Anu, if we can start with you, what are like the compliance challenges that are most burning, most urgent to you? What keeps you up at night these days?
So, of course, my current role, like I said, is at Coinbase, and I think all of you will appreciate that crypto is such a fast evolving space. I think it's I used to think banking is complex, but crypto is, blockchain crypto is way more complex in terms of complying with the regulations. So there is a FATF travel rule, which has been such a difficult thing to comply with for not just Singapore, across the world, mainly because, not just because in banking, at least you have the regulation that is prescriptive, so you know what to do. Travel rule has been something which, even the regulators across the world are trying to figure out how to comply with. So that is definitely the most complex thing that has been kind of on my mind there. Definitely.
Chiara, what is it for you?
I think for me, for us, it's more about the fact that we're very still manual, not very automated. But we have to comply with every single thing, the same requirements that a large financial institution will have to apply to. So we have limited resources and limited technology, and a little bit of a dinosaur mentality when it comes to changing processes and adopting new systems that will make everyone's life more efficient. So what keeps me up is to try to push people to change, and it's not very easy. And our counterparties, the ecosystem we evolve in, is actually very archaic as well, because no offense if any one of you is from private banking. Yes, but it's very much paper-based. It's very much wet ink. And I was sharing before, DocuSigns are not acceptable for banks. So it's hard to change if the people you work with don't accept change either, internally and externally. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
If I may just ask a follow-up question on that. So you have lots of challenges you would like to make it more efficient with RegTalk. When you're looking at RegTalk, RegTalk is literally across all aspects of compliance right now. Which RegTalk solutions do you think would provide the highest value to a company like yours? And maybe just for people who don't understand independent asset managers, those are generally small companies with 10, 20 staff. We're not looking at the MNC with 1,000 staff and a IT department with 500 plus or anything. It's small companies.
Yeah. Exactly.
So where do you think you could most gain the most value from a RegTalk solution for a particular area, or what would you be looking at? Three things.
One is to be updated on, because we're small, and actually the whole of the association is small. Our members, like Rolf said, are between sometimes even 4 people to 20, perhaps 50 at most. So the resources are limited, which means compliance staff is very limited. A lot of them outsource compliance, which means that they're not necessarily aware of when there is a change. The tendency is to read through the guideline and be like, oh, it doesn't apply to us. But in the end, when the regulator comes, it does apply. So to be updated on the changes constantly, that would save a lot of time, I think. But it's also very hard to put into practice because it's quite specific. Cross-border issues for clients who are booked in other countries or live in other countries. There are a lot of cross-border implications which apply to us, and many of our peers have no idea that they exist, or they think, oh, I'm not a bank, so who cares? And then the third thing is that we have multiple people work on this with the same information across multiple departments, and they change things, but it doesn't necessarily flow because there is no centralized system with data, with customer data or internal data. So it creates more human error and risk of misinformation. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Anu, have you seen some approaches to those challenges in the financial institutions you worked with, and has it been more of a manual approach, or is it more of a tech approach that is coming in? How is that dealt with?
Yeah, so I used to be an internal auditor with Prudential. So I remember traveling to various locations and being there for 2 to 3 weeks in Korea, Japan, UK, and sitting with files. So that is how I started 17 years ago. So, and I did not enjoy that. So it's been a lot of, it's evolved a lot in terms of, you know, how technology is being used in the financial sector. So, I mean, of course, there's RegTalk and Fintech. Overall, the Fintech evolution has been really amazing for everyone. I have worked in companies, even though they were digital, kind of digital platforms, the customer-facing modules might have evolved, but not the back office. That happens. But there is, I think that is where the focus needs to be. Because, you know, I think you've named this panel correctly in terms of navigating the compliance maze. There's just so much to do. There are only 2 options, either to automate or to keep hiring more resources. And there's never enough budget to keep hiring more people. So I have seen both the sides, and the only sustainable and scalable solution is really to go for automation and use of more technology. I don't see any other way.
Do you see it being implemented in a particular area of compliance, or do you see it in many different aspects of compliance that tech solutions are coming?
Yeah, so I think the most common one I've seen is KYC and onboarding and screening solutions. There are multiple companies, there are lots and lots of companies offering various levels of support in that area. That I think is the most common RegTalk solution. The other areas is cross-border compliance, because it's so complex, it's so vast. So there are cross-border regulations where you can use the platform to understand what are your obligations if you're operating in country X and want to offer your services, financial services in country Y. So I've seen that. The other areas I've seen are, of course, you know, very advanced in terms of within KYC, where say, you know, you're doing non-face-to-face onboarding and you upload a selfie. There are systems and the RegTalk solutions which can perform a facial similarity checks, validity of documents checks, so they can check the barcode and tell you whether it's a valid document. So you can't cite the originals, and you can never have a certified true copy for those cases, right? So that's not the idea anyway. So there are solutions around in those areas. The other one I've seen is just managing overall regulations, like the chart that you showed just now, one of the slides, where just for fund management, you see there are so many. Overall, just from MAS, there's so many regulations. Like, so it can help you monitor all your regulatory obligations in one system. And if there are updates, I think it's more than following up or maintaining the existing regulatory library. What becomes really real challenge for compliance professionals like me is horizon scanning to say what is coming up, what are the regulations that are going to come up, you know, in 6 months or 1 year. So that kind of horizon scanning. Also to updates to the existing regulatory library, because you can create everything on, say, manually on Excel in the first scope, but how are you able to maintain it? You can't maintain it possibly manually. So those are some of the solutions I've seen in the market so far.
Thanks. John, you are developing solutions, and you are looking or have developed solutions to manage compliance obligations. So maybe if you can give a hint on, like, what do you see in that space? How is it possible? What can be done in that area? And maybe also what are the challenges that you encounter, for example, with regards to the updating of regulations, which is a challenge to Chiara, is a challenge to Anu as well. How does that work, or do you see a solution?
Well, let me speak for my industry first. We can solve all of your problems. The fun thing about this business is that we are essentially competing against Excel spreadsheets, right? We'll look back in a couple of decades and you will tell your children that you won't believe this, but we manage financial institutions with Excel spreadsheets and we put people's addresses in them and their phone numbers. But hey, Excel can add those phone numbers up, right? So we're in a pretty wacky state of affairs. And the state of digitization, we are really at the bottom of the curve. We feel like we've come a long way in a couple of decades, and from an internet standpoint we have, but we are still way behind. Partly because we as the service providers are still putting pieces of this together. I think clients are often asking for one solution that solves everything. That's not going to happen. And when that does happen, it's not going to be good enough. We see that with really big technology players now. So for the most part, the solutions come from smaller companies, and the buyers, the consumers of those companies, resources need to look at the pieces that solve the problem, and then they need to ensure that those pieces fit together. That's the important part. And on the regulatory updates, that's a pretty well-trodden path. In our company, we've got a team of people that does nothing else, and we sell that as a service, and there are many companies that do the same thing. But the question's interesting because we're talking about big companies and small companies. Small companies have exactly the same problems as big companies without the people to solve. So I think when Chiara mentioned the platform, there's no central platform. That's one thing that most of us in our profession have managed to crack. We provide platforms that solve most of your issues. And in our case, Quant Legal Tech distributes compliance tasks around an organization of any size, provides the background information to enable the person who receives it to execute, and then saves the proof, provides the nice charts, and simplifies everything. And we've got a principle that I've tried to bake in, which is every compliance task should be executed at the lowest level in the company it can be confidently carried out. Now, that's not the case now. You look at what's on the desk of compliance professionals. They're dealing with a lot of minutiae. So what our platform and many others try to do is to enable compliance to be distributed around the organization. And I like to tell people, I can create more compliance headcount for you without additional cost. And they look kind of stunned. How do you do that? Well, look at the number of people you have in your company. How many people are helping you in compliance? Well, there's this here. Well, wait a minute, because what about the other 15 departments? What are they doing with compliance? Well, they send me a report. Well, why don't they upload their report into your tool? Why do you need to wait for them to send you information? So centralized platforms enable that to happen. And I think the breakthrough, I think for us and perhaps others, is that when you go out into an organization and start proselytizing about compliance, people get that it's important. But you also know that in your client base, you've got a group of people that are enthusiasts about compliance. They live and breathe it and love it. Mad people we are. And then you've got a second group that kind of get it's really important, are always helpful, but it's not the center of their day job. And then you've got this massive group of people who really don't get excited about it. And that's the group that it's the hardest to engage with. So we've found that if we are able to enable that third group with the information for them to contribute to your compliance mission, number one. Secondly, you put a little bit of steel in there because there's escalations to management if they don't make their reports. And thirdly, on a more positive note, we gather up everything that they've done in the last year and put it in one page. So with 2 clicks at their annual review, I've got 100% compliance contribution rate to the company. So you take something that was a pain in the feet and you turn it into a positive thing by showing everybody in the company that they can contribute to their company's compliance mission. Let me stop there for the moment.
And some very interesting angles how we can turn everybody into a compliance officer. But following on also of what you mentioned with having that centralized data interaction between or distribution of the tasks, Chiara, if I can first get your view and then Anu on how does that interaction work in your financial institutions or what you have seen so far? Like, how is that interaction between manual processes and automated processes or RegTalk tools or other types of tools? And how is the integration between multiple tools? Is there a automated workflow, for example, or is it very much siloed? What is that approach? How does that collaboration between manual and the various tools work?
I think I understand your question, but I'm not so sure. But first, I just wanted to say that Excel is very powerful. So how does integration with technology work in the company?
Yeah,
Like
and you have certain things where you use tools, or at least
the problem is
Excel spreadsheet. Other things are completely manual, and you already mentioned that some financial institutions that your company needs to work with also have manual processes. How do you manage that interaction between manual and tools?
You need to create the problem. The key problem of all of this is that you need to, because we are not custodians, which means we don't have the data. It's the custodian banks who have the data. So the key is to establish the link between the banks and whichever tool and us, right? And that is not easy to get because you can have the best RegTalk software or whatever, like platform or what you want. But if the data doesn't flow in or doesn't flow in properly, it's not going to work. It's going to be useless. So, so how do you manage that? Depends. With some institutions, they're more advanced, so it's easier to get that link. With others, it's some institutions don't even want to send you flat files, you know. So it's sometimes you still have to input manually data into something, into a system, because you still get PDFs. So I don't know if that helps in any way. If that answers your question.
It shows the challenges. Anu, how do you or have you experienced that interaction between manual and automated processes and potentially also between different automated processes from multiple tools, which is a challenge from the integration process as well?
Yeah, so I think in one word, I would say there's lots of inefficiencies when there is kind of a hybrid kind of, you're not completely at the level where everything is automated, everything straight through. It just nicely, say, let's take a KYC document. It's uploaded by the customer on an app, then it goes on the system that you're using, then it nicely flows through your CRM automatically. So when there's not such a process of a clear straight through, there are some inefficiencies involved, definitely, I would say. In terms of integration, again, I think in terms of manuals and using multiple solutions, the issue is that they all need to talk to a central system. So there needs to be a central system which talks to all the systems involved. And if that link is missing, there can be inefficiency. There can also be a process breakdown in that sense. So that's one challenge. I think that there is other reasons involved in terms of, I think maybe we'll cover that later in the panel, because I was thinking about this question on integration and using various systems, because you kind of onboard a solution which may be external, and then the regulation changes. So you've already invested in a solution to solve a problem, but that problem is gone. Now you have a new problem to solve. So those are some of the challenges in terms of integration and putting everything together. So some companies that I work for, and my current place as well, we do use external solutions, but we do a lot of it in-house, so that we have the code and we have a development team if there are changes in regulation, we can match. And we need to, I'm currently in a very fast-paced environment and in Regulators as well. So Fintechs, because they're so fast-paced, they can't be waiting around for budget approvals and all that. So we can be more agile in that sense in terms of making the updates to our solutions. That's what we've done so far.
You are also raising another interesting question that I want to touch on. How do FIs actually decide on when to implement a technology solution instead of a manual process, and how do you go about that selection process?
Is that for me, the question? Okay.
Yes, it will make the rounds.
So, I mean, it depends on the philosophy of the company, really, that you're working for. You know, so ever since I have been in fintech companies, anything that a machine can do, we will let a machine do that. We won't hire people for that. So it's basically, boils down to the philosophy of the company. We do not, because fintech companies are scaling up so rapidly. They want to build solutions, or they want to have a system which is scalable. They can roll it out in any country they want. They're going to various countries. They're having more client acquisition, and it's at a rapid rate. So always, if we can automate something, we will. If a machine can do it, we'll let a machine do that. But of course, I will give you the other perspective in terms of the companies, the more traditional companies that I worked for. There are lots of issues in terms of legacy systems. Nobody wants to, because there's so much customer data. There are people who are used to the older systems. So there is problem of legacy systems. There is issue of customer data, migration of that data. So then in a traditional setup, I would say it's more these points that become like, start driving the decisions, whether people want to change something and whether people think that automated solution or a RegTech solution will be a real kind of help to them, or will it add to their work? So it depends. To answer in one line, it depends on the philosophy of the company. That's my experience.
So for small companies, it depends on how many, how big is your problem. I think if you deal with less than 200 clients, say files, you can do it manually. You can hire someone else, or you can just you don't need to automate anything, because you can still manage your risk. So the question is, you do it when you have no choice, when it becomes too complex, and when you can't hire anyone because maybe you don't have the resources and you can't outsource. So if all of these things don't match, there's no point really to automate anything, because it's still manageable and it stays inside. And one of the things that people in wealth management care about the most is privacy and making sure that the data stays inside. The client information stays inside, that there is no potential leak, and the less outsourcing you can do, the better, because it creates less complexity. So I think for us, it's more of that, how much you can handle by yourself. Do I need to hire more people to do the same job? And yeah, that's the key criteria, I would say.
John, what are the challenges you are encountering speaking to the FIs when you pitch the RegTech solutions?
Well, very interesting hearing these answers. Hey, nothing's broken. Okay, nothing's blowing up. We haven't had any major excursions. But in fact, a lot of our business is triggered by excursions, triggered by audits. We love auditors. They're wonderful, warm people. They point out things that could go wrong, many cases before they go wrong. So that's really important to us. So there's always that tension within any company. Am I going to invest in a solution? Am I going to build it myself? On the building side, it's really, really hard to build technology to solve industry problems. So unless you're either very big or very well organized and very focused, it's going to fail. Sorry to say it's my conclusion, but if you're really big and you've got the resources and expertise, you can do it. But then again, you ask big companies that have the resources and the expertise about their system, and they'll say, you know, we've got this system, it's not very good, but we build it, we start with it. It's what we hear all the time, right? So a lot of the big companies are looking to larger independent companies to provide interoperable solutions for their next iteration. And so it's always a tough one whether they build or not. But the small companies, I think you're pretty much wasting your time building anything in software. It's too hard. It's too easy to make a mess of. I say that because I've been in a company who's had its own challenges in building products. I just know how hard it is. And I had a friend in a company who was running a business and decided to set up his own software system. He focused really hard on it. He told me the reasons why. You can't run a business and develop a software solution for that business at the same time unless you are a very big organization. And so that's the learning that I've seen. And otherwise, we wait for that lovely, friendly auditor to walk in and recommend that something gets fixed.
Interesting points. At this stage, I would actually like to encourage the audience. Do you have any questions you would like to ask? Okay, yes, please, and I'll hand you over the mic.
Hey guys, I'm Madhur. I'm a bank by profession, and I used to deal with about 13 regulators at one point in time. I'm a compliance banker. Over the past year, I've been scaling up RegTalks, Fintechs, and a number of the other techs. So, and they depend on me for scaling up it to kind of help them do business development. So here are the issues I faced, and these are firsthand. And excuses of not taking RegTalks on board. And some of the RegTalks I'm working with are Michelin restaurants, and I've seen even Starbucks coffee shops. RegTalks. There's a huge difference between the type of RegTalk solution. It could be from AML to KYC to KYB to detecting positive to false positives. There's a ton of permutations and combinations. So one of the issues I face is we're not ready for the solution as an enterprise, as a bank. It's a large bank. So let's say assume the bank has 50, 75,000 people. So that's one. Two, I faced internal development versus getting in a RegTalk. So obviously the comment is we're going to build it on our tech stack rather than import a new tech into our company, right? So you really don't want an IKEA coming into your company. You want handmade furniture inside your company. So that's the second issue of this. The third is third-party service agreements. Some entities take a year to negotiate a third-party service agreement. By that time, there's a fair amount of change that has happened, and there's a fair amount of, by change I mean management change that could happen, and decisions can get murky at that point in time. The successes I've seen are in smaller organizations, and what Kiara, you mentioned, 200 entities. Those guys don't want to import a tech team, and they don't have a large tech team. So 100, 200, 300. So let's say a less than 1,000 person organization, don't want to hire 30 tech people in order to create a certain tech platform for themselves. They're willing to import from outside or get an IKEA into their house. And that's the simplest success that's in our 10,000 person organization. You go into a POC which is 6 months. At the end of 6 months, it really comes back and say, we're going to implement it. And so those are real challenges I've seen RegTalks face. I don't see that getting to a conclusion very quickly, because human nature is human nature, and human nature is A, to protect their own jobs, and two, not to change too much very quickly. So so one of the ideas I gave to one of the entities I'm working with, so you guys need to create a Trojan horse. You guys need to choose 3 organizations, get jobs in all 3 organizations, and convince them that's the best RegTalk to get. It's going to take you a year, but that's the only way you're going to be successful. Otherwise, you're going to beat your head on POCs, you're going to read your head on third-party service agreements. It's going to take you a little time. Anyway, just some reflections.
Thanks a lot.
Sure. Yeah. Very, very helpful comment. It's a real world comment. No one can say you're wrong because that's your experience. The one thing I'd add to it is that the outsourcing capabilities and new business models that we're seeing with RegTech, I think are really quite exciting in the sense that we can't always RegTechs solve your problem. But if you've got pieces of the problem that can be outsourced, outsourcing has been done forever, but for the most part, it's outsourcing to a black box. No one knows who that person is, but the answer comes back and everyone's happy. I hate to see that as a RegTech service provider because I want integration of those services in your business. I want you to know who they are and what they do. And I want what they produce to be understood within the company and disseminated within the company using your resources. And so that works to enable people like Rolf, ex-Swiss regulator, who can now plug into a bank with a specific role because they need assistance. When I was a general counsel, I was always wanting to bring people in to help. But every time I'd stop and think, I've got to write a spec for this, the transaction cost and defining what he's going to do, putting them in the organization and having a control mechanism was too complicated. With centralized platforms, we can plug and play expertise like that, plug that in. We can enable TRM experts to come in and just do one piece. We can have outsourced SOC compliance people. And I see that piece of it working really well. We just haven't solved the bigger picture that you mentioned. Sorry.
I have a question for Chiara mostly, but also for Anna. You discuss on how difficult it might be to change, how manual your processes are still are. That extent is good, which is good. But there was no mention of risks, operational risks, and costs, which means that ultimately RegTech is meant to deliver lower operational risks so that you meet your regulatory requirements, so that your regulators are happy, but also to lower costs. So my question to you is, don't you look in your business mix at your costs, at the time you can free for your relationship manager so that they can talk to clients rather than send emails or do Excel? And likewise, don't you look at your risk and make sure that you lower risk by having solutions that prevent input mistakes, copy paste mistakes, all of this?
Yeah, but actually, risk has two sides here. There is the operational risk, the human error risk, which I fully agree with you. But there is also risk when you decide to use RegTech software, which is not it's not why. The question is, why do people develop their own thing? It's because they want to keep their data in-house. So you open yourself, you're more vulnerable to the outside world when you start using a platform. Okay, I know you don't agree with me, but it's the.
I don't disagree with
yeah.
you. We think by developing an in-house system, we have better security systems than the RegTech, which have Fintechs, who have vulnerabilities assessments.
Yeah, no, I agree, but at the same time, it's most of RegTechs are startups, and you don't know if you're gonna be there tomorrow. You know, and I don't know if I want to change my processes. Not you, obviously, but like, yeah, I don't know if I want to change my processes, train my people, invest time doing something that perhaps in 6 months' time is not going to be there anymore or will not meet my needs. And then on costs and on people, when you're small like us, your compliance officer, you need to, I mean, you're not going to cut her head or his head because the platform will not solve all your problems, and still you need a person, and still you need intelligence, you know, not just artificial intelligence, but human intelligence. And I think also a lot of compliance, like we call that call reports in our jargon. it's basically the RM sitting down with the client, and he writes the story, and then he gets supporting documents, and that cannot be replaced by in the high net worth space cannot be replaced by technology, I feel, at this stage.
Maybe I'll add on a little bit on that question. So like I said, it depends on the philosophy of the company. So it's like a decision tree where all those factors, of course, the risk and costs need to be considered. But in my experience working with MNCs previously and now Fintechs, what I have noticed is that there is a certain decision tree that follows. So in Fintechs, I've seen a very, very big inclination to automate and use RegTech. That is always the first option because they know that they are, like I said, they're going to scale up. So the risks are, of course, evaluated in terms of then the first decision is whether to automate. The answer is almost always I've seen as yes. And then the next stage is on the risk and cost. So in terms of the risk and cost, that is where the next decision comes in for fintech companies, is whether to build something in-house or whether to go for an external RegTech solution. Of course, to address Chiara's point on data protection, there needs to be a full due diligence on any RegTech solution that you engage. So there are lots and lots of RegTech companies, but they need to go through a very stringent due diligence. They of course have to pass all the due diligence. If say for example, if when I worked at a UK headquartered company, they need to meet all the GDPR requirements. So they need to be compliant with GDPR before we can onboard them. So we did a mix of in-house versus external RegTech solutions. And the decision rationale was, not so much of risk, I would say, but more of cost, because we've always had a big engineering team who were constantly developing solutions in-house. So those are, certainly, those are two important factors to consider to evaluate RegTech solutions.
Maybe I can add something else. Ultimately, if something goes wrong, the responsibility is on us and not on the platform. And if there is a breach of anything that hasn't been flagged, we are the ones getting the fine. And I think at the end of the day, the responsibility is on the fund manager or the financial institution, and that is the biggest challenge. Because are you willing to take the responsibility, or is it still up to my interpretation? And I think the answer is it's still up to my interpretation, right? So what risk am I really removing?
I'll grant a last question, then we'll wrap up, keeping time in mind. We're already past.
Sure. So just picking up on the last comment there, one of the philosophies I guess I've had, and I've worked for financial institutions most of my career, is that you can outsource some compliance tasks, but you can't outsource compliance, because that is part of the accountability you need to take as a regulated entity. And that's something that no regulator will ever forgive a regulated entity for. So as RegTechs and as Fintechs, we need to understand that the traditional cloud methodology of no liability accepted, for a service that we sell, is directly incompatible with selling a service to compliance, because by inference there needs to be some liability accepted. So we've got to solve that problem somehow, and I have no idea how to do that. I guess the other thing just to reflect on, I'm not sure if anyone's seen the MAS enforcement infographic that was published a few months ago, but MAS is following the trend of the regulators in Australia and has started fining civilly decision makers and regulated entities, and there have been jail sentences. So in Australia, the fines are up to $84 million a year, civil fines to decision makers and regulated entities. So I guess I'm curious as to whether that's impacting compliance and compliance leadership, being able to fill roles, but also maybe driving some of the new fintech solutions to a quicker time frame to determine whether it fits or not.
Thanks all. Do you want to?
Yeah, I can. I think it's it's to do with the MAS outsourcing guidelines, which is very, very clear in that aspect, to say that you can outsource a function, but the responsibility is still yours. And that's why I cannot stress enough on the due diligence aspects before you take on a fintech or a RegTech solution to support you in your compliance workload. It is basically in terms of, it is as good as hiring a contractor. You can never say that the contractor is not an employee and that's why you're not responsible for what they do. So it's contracting a service, right? So the due diligence is very, very important. It has to meet all the requirements, and the due diligence needs to be refreshed, of course. So there's onboarding due diligence. It needs to be refreshed every year. And I will absolutely agree that the management and the decision makers are responsible for what goes on. And they need to have that oversight via whether it's asking the RegTech company or whoever you outsource the activities to do, submit regular reports, returns, and whatever might be a gap you think they need to report on an ongoing basis.
Thanks a lot, Anu. I think that was some very good points on to close off this panel. I would encourage all of you to actually stay behind, have some food, get to know the people here, learn about what other people do, what their experiences in RegTech, compliance, technology, whatever are, learn from each other, see how we can connect. Thanks a lot to our three panelists. I think we would still have lots of questions, but we're short on time. So thank you all for attending today, and I hope, or we really hope, to welcome you again at further RegTalks. Thanks a lot.